Hello there, I'm Barb Mann,
And I'm Doug Weiss.
and we're with Balsam Moon Preserve and here to present to you the Back to Basics workshop on cordwood construction as an alternative building process. And we'll tell you a little bit more about Balsam Moon at the end of the session. But for now, let's do our screen sharing for the PowerPoint. So we're presenting alternative building techniques, building with cordwood.
We've been using alternative building techniques for quite a long time at Balsam Moon. And they include a variety of things, including cutting our own logs from trees that die on the property, and sawing them into logs and or into lumber, and planing them, and use them for all of the buildings that we built at Balsam Moon. We make our own foundations out of cement and sand and rocks that we have on our property. We use an old antique cement mixer that's older than I am, and that's saying something. We use rocks, as you can see in the upper picture in the middle, on many of our buildings, also for retaining walls and our cement. A variety of other uses. Rocks are very plentiful out here in Bungo. We use alternative techniques like cob for our barrel oven here. We use post and beam construction, like for the enclosure for the oven, cordwood, and you can see on the walls here, and a timber frame structure up in the upper left-hand corner. For a pavilion that we built recently. So we use a variety of alternative techniques.
So we'll go through this is really a brief introduction to the process, and we'll give the prelude of building the framework for doing cordwood construction as one method of applying that technique. And then we used a couple of primary resources that Rob Roy, who's a long practitioner of cordwood building, and those are a couple of his books that we used as reference. And yeah, anything else you want to say about that, Doug?
Well, certainly for more details, look at Rob Roy's books or videos online. He's certainly an expert. One of the first things you need to do is calculate, if you're planning a project, that is to calculate the amount of cordwood that you need for a project. And the first thing is to calculate the square footage of wall space that you need or will have in your building, and then subtract the amount of space that's taken up by windows or doors or timbers. So let's look at that for our particular project. We are building a 14 by 38 guest cabin. And so we had 38-foot long walls. We had 7-foot high walls. So we took 38 times 7, and there are 2 sides, so times 2 is 534 square feet. And then the ends were 14 feet by 7 feet. There's 2 sides, so that made 196 square feet. Adding those two together was 730 square feet. And then adding up all of the space that was taken up by doors and windows and timbers turned out to be 260 square feet. So we subtracted that, came up with 470 square feet of cordwood that was needed. So then we divide by this magic number that Rob Roy came up with of 32. So dividing 470 by 32, we come up with 14.7 face cords of cordwood that we needed. And a face cord is 4 feet high by 8 feet long by the depth of the wall that you're going to use, or the width of the wall that you're going to use. In our case, that was 10 inches. So it's 4 by 8 by 10 inches wide. Okay. So the second thing is to select the wood or the logs that you're going to use for your cordwood. And my bias is to use what's available and what can be responsibly harvested. So for us, we had a 40-plus-year-old red pine plantation. And these trees were much too close together. They're 6 to 8 feet apart. They're 50 or 60 feet tall, and they're stunted because they're much too close together. And so they needed to be thinned. And so this was a great opportunity to use this wood for a useful purpose. But you can use a variety of different softwoods or hardwoods. Softwoods are really preferred for a couple of reasons. One, that they have less shrinkage or expansion as they dry. And the other thing is that they have a higher R value. You can see, as far as insulation purposes, they have an R value of about 1.4 per inch, whereas hardwoods have an R value of about half that, or about 0.8 per inch. So they do have a better insulation capacity. Hardwoods certainly can be used, and they are more resistant to rot as a general principle. Okay, how long do you let cordwood dry before using it? This is open to question. Softwoods, probably not particularly critical. You can let them set for 3 months or even up to a year, or possibly even more before you use them. It's not particularly critical. We used on our project, we used red pine, as we said. We cut it in January and used it in July. We used a moisture meter, and there's no information in the literature on using a moisture meter. These moisture meters are inexpensive. They cost about 15 bucks. So we just checked the moisture in January, and the content was about 30%. In July, when we used it, it was about 12 to 15%. And after being in the wall for a couple months in September, it was 9 to 12%, which is just about the range of moisture content of dry lumber. So it was getting quite dry by September. And we've had no expansion or contraction that we noted in the wall since we put it up now into December. Hardwoods are much more susceptible to expansion and contraction. And so Rob Roy recommends only drying them for about 6 weeks. Expansion is a real problem. If the walls expand, they can actually push the walls out or push the rafters up. So that can be a real problem. If they do retract, you can cock around the logs. You have a space there. We used elm in the oven enclosure. We didn't let it set for only about 3 weeks, though it was a dead tree that we used, and we did get a lot of shrinkage and had large gaps around some of those larger logs.
So wood processing. So obviously the trees are cut, and you want to start working on processing those fairly quickly after they're cut. At least that was our experience in working with the wood. So you peel the bark off of the trees that are cut down using a draw knife. And they say that peeling is the easiest to do in the spring and the summer when the sap is actually flowing. And obviously our experience is that we've cut both times for last year's project and this coming year's project in January, December and January. And I found the process of stripping the bark with the draw knife pretty easy for the most part. Of course, I don't have anything to compare it to because I've never done it in the spring. So, but I didn't think it was excessively difficult to do. And then used a chainsaw to cut the logs to the length that we wanted for our building. So the guest cabin is a 3-season cabin. and decided on a 10-inch length for those lengths of cordwood. If you're doing a year-round home, the range typically for the length of the logs would be 18 to 24 inches for more insulating value. And anything you want to say about that, Doug?
Well, using a chainsaw to cut logs up into length, or cut the cordwood into length, is reasonably fast and easy to do. You need to get a straight cut across the log, and that's relatively easy when the log is laying flat. We had some problems last year when logs were laying on hillsides, and so they weren't laying flat, they're laying at an angle, and then you had to try to guess at how to cut straight across the log. And so we got some angle cuts. And so this year we changed our approach and used my tractor and loader to get the logs up on some sawhorses. And then if they were at an angle, I would lift one end up so it was level. And then I could get a nice straight cut across the logs. And we got much straighter cuts on our logs. There are some other ways to cut more precisely that you could look at and find in Rob Roy's books. But a chainsaw works well and is a fast way to cut these logs, and I think it's adequate, at least for my purposes.
Yeah, and we did mark them. So we had a marking block cut to 10 inches and used a wood crayon to mark those as well, and just marked all the way down the log. And then Doug came through with a chainsaw. So it worked good. So we did take a little bit of a video clip of doing the log peeling with the draw knife. So we'll run that so you can actually get a feel for how that looks and feels. And this is Doug doing the peeling. And I don't know if you have anything you want to say. It's a nice new draw knife that he purchased. The draw knife has two sides of the blade. One, the back side, what I call the back side, is flat, and the top side is beveled, which is the way he's working with it right now.
Yeah, it certainly is much easier to do this in the spring and summertime. We're busy with programs and building projects in summer, so it's just we have more time in the fall and winter, and that's why we do it at that time of year.
And this was about a 50-foot tree.
Yeah.
And that takes about, it took us, the two of us working, typically 45 minutes to an hour to peel off the bark. And of course we do this with deep gratitude to the trees and the sun and the soil for growing this lovely tree. There you can see. And obviously you get one top side done, and then we had to turn it, turn the log, the tree, so that we could peel the bottom side as well. So once your cordwood is cut into your lengths that you've predetermined in designing your building, we haul it out to our field, which is nice and sunny, and stack it up like you would cordwood. And that way we can measure, so it's 4 feet high, and we can measure the 8-foot sections, and how we needed seven face cord.
14.
Oh, well, that's right. Last year's project was 14 face cord. So there's obviously quite a bit of wood there. So the first time we did this, we just laid the cordwood on the snow. And what we found was that those bottom logs did retain more moisture and got a little bit moldy. They were still usable, of course, but they had some coloring, discoloration to them. So this year with the project we have coming up for 2022, we laid down some split firewood pieces as a base, and then we piled and stacked the cordwood on top of the firewood. So that is a barrier between the snow and the ground and the rest of the cordwood, which I think will work. And you'll notice the picture on your left shows and exhibits some of the beauty of nature's artwork in the cross cuts on the wood. They're just beautiful. Lots of shapes and designs. We found little dragonfly shapes and flowers, of course, and it's pretty fun. And the rings of growth, of course.
Let's briefly run through the building project itself, which is a bit of an alternative approach. We need to get the cordwood off the ground, so we need a foundation that should be at least 8 inches off the ground so it stays dry. As long as it stays dry, it's going to last for a very long time. So we built a cement foundation. We ran a string around and found the perimeter of the building. We dug in a footing by hand, John and I, and then we put in a form, inside and outside form, and then mixed cement in our old cement mixer with sand from our own property, and then poured the cement in the forms. The forms are held together with some outside bracing, but also some bolts across the footings, so we don't need a lot of outside bracing to hold them together. We had some rebar inside for support, but also a lot of rocks to decrease the amount of cement that was needed, which is Portland cement. But we have a lot of rocks, so we use them, and they're free and cheap, or they're free, I should say. So that was the approach that we took to make our foundation.
And Doug, what is this right here, these vertical rods?
We'll look at those in a minute.
All right.
And then the cabin framing, we used this post and beam construction, and we used 6x8 jack pine timbers for that purpose. And down here we can see these little these are 1/2-inch rebar pins that were in the foundation, as you saw on the previous slide. They were seated about 2 feet down in the foundation, stuck up about 3 inches. But these are used to seat the posts, and so we took the posts and set them on top of the pins and whacked them with a hammer to give the impression of the pins on the bottom of the post, and then drilled the holes and then set them back down to seat them in place. We then placed the beams on top of the posts to tie the posts together and screwed them together with 10-inch timber screws. And timber screws are great things. They really hold structures together. And this structure, once we got it screwed together, was much stronger than stick frame building. It didn't wiggle at all. We then built our own truss rafters out of our own lumber and put them in place. And let's go on to the next slide. This up in the upper left-hand corner just shows us putting up the rafters. We made a decision because oriented strand board prices were over $60 a sheet. To not sheet up the roof, we put purlins on, and instead of asphalt shingles, to go with metal for roofing, which saved us about $1,000. And I put in a masonry chimney and flashed it, and it hasn't leaked to this point, so I'll consider that a success. First time I did that. Before we laid any cordwood, we also put the doors and windows in. I built sturdy 2-inch frames around both doors and windows and attached them to either the posts or the beams, and then secured them pretty well as far as to prevent them from being compressed by the cordwood in the process of laying up cordwood. So all of that was done before we did any cordwood. The next thing is to mix some mortar. And there's 3 different types of mortar that we can make. 2 of them contain basically cement, and the other one is a lime type mortar. The Portland cement mix is different from the masonry mix, and that masonry mix has more lime in it to begin with. So the Portland cement mix has 9 parts sand, 3 parts soaked sawdust. Soaked sawdust is a fine sawdust that's soaked in water for at least overnight before you use it. And then 2 parts Portland cement. And that's mixed together and can be mixed. It doesn't work very well to mix it in a cement mixer because it's just too sticky and it doesn't want to come out of a regular cement mixer, but works well to mix that in a wheelbarrow, as you can see here. The masonry mix is pretty similar to that, but it has 3 parts masonry cement and then only 2 parts hydrated lime, and that's a type S hydrated lime. So those are pretty similar types of mortar. We chose to use a hydrated lime mortar. The reason for that is that it's more environmentally friendly in that cement has large CO2 emissions associated with its production, whereas hydrated lime actually consumes CO2 in the process of hardening. And so it's actually a net CO2 consumer as opposed to emitting CO2 into the environment, which we associate with climate change. So 2.5 parts sand and then 1 part lime putty, which we'll look at in the next slide. Okay, we do need to make up lime putty before the day that we use it. In fact, it needs a set of about 3 days. So we mix, and this is my mixture that I came up with, to mix 5 gallons of water in 1 50-pound bag of hydrated lime. That's type S hydrated lime. And I used a big plastic 55-gallon barrel that I cut part of the top off of. And I used a large electric drill. You can see the 3/8 electric drill that we used down here, which was much too small. It burned up the first time we mixed lime putty, so we had to get a bigger one. You stir it until you get a nice creamy, thick consistency. And then that will last for a long time. If you cover the top with water, it won't harden and can set for days to months until you use it. Again, you need to wear gloves and masks and eye protection because this can be a bit irritating. Jono's skin was sensitive to this stuff. It didn't bother me, but he got quite irritated by mixing this lime putty. Okay, mixing lime mortar. We need a 2.5 to 1 ratio of this lime putty to sand, and it should be a fairly fine sand. So I mixed up 5 gallons, or put a 5-gallon bucket of sand and 2 gallons of lime. I usually put lime putty, I'm sorry. And so I usually put half of the sand either in a wheelbarrow or in a container. And I use a trash can for that. And then put in 1 gallon of lime putty and mixed either by hand. And the first couple of days I was mixing for several people, and I mixed a wheelbarrow. My shoulders and elbows started to get sore, so I decided to use this paddle mixer and a large electric drill. And that was much easier on my arms. And as you can see, at first, when you start mixing, it looks very brown, very much like dirt. By the time you get done mixing, it should look nice and white and be very sticky. Look kind of like wet white beach sand, and should stick, make a nice ball and stick to the side of the container. And then you've got a nice mortar that's ready to use.
So we also need to have an insulation fill, and what's recommended is mixing sawdust and lime. And so we did this also in a wheelbarrow. We had all our parts and pieces and ingredients for doing the process of cordwood construction prepared ahead of time. So we're moving into getting ready to do our construction with the cordwood. But we used a wheelbarrow full of sawdust, which we got for free from a sawmill, lumber mill nearby. And then you add 2 shovelfuls of lime. And of course, you're wearing protective gear, a mask, and gloves in the process of doing this, because that lime is very, very fine and can be irritating, as Doug mentioned earlier. And you also try to be out of the wind. So we're doing this outside, obviously, but if you can do the mixing of this in a sheltered area, free from the breezes and stuff, that's a given, because then it's not blowing all over the place.
You can also spray a little bit of water. You got a hose, spray a little bit of water on it. That cuts down on
The dust.
dust and the amount of lime that gets into the air. And you put the lime in the sawdust just to kind of keep the insects from getting into the sawdust and keep insects out.
Yeah. And you'll see how this gets applied as we move into the process of construction. So another thing in preparation, if you choose to do this and add this to your building that you're creating, are bottle logs. And they can add a really nice design feature to break up the look of the logs. And to do this, obviously you collect a lot of bottles. I think we collected over 300 bottles, because it takes 2 bottles per bottle log. And you have to cut the tops off the bottles, as you'll see in the left-hand picture here, and learned that it was really great to use a tabletop tile cutting saw. And it worked like a charm. It really did. It was great. And again, you wear protective gear with this, a shield over your face, clear one, obviously, so you can see what you're doing. But you cut your logs or your bottles to, each one is half the length of your full length of log. And you make your bottle logs 1.5 inches longer than your cordwood logs. So they do stick out a little bit farther than the cordwood in the construction here. But once you have your 2 bottles, you match up a couple, a clear one and a color one, or 2 clear. I found two colored ones just were too dark for filtering the light through, which you learn in hindsight, but I had to try it. So, but you tape them together with an aluminum foil tape, which is pretty sturdy. And then you poke some holes around the middle where the seaming is. And that is to let any moisture that might be inside those bottles free to evaporate. Otherwise you get a steamy condensation filled bottle, which is not what you want to have in the final product. And then here on the right, you see boxes of bottles already, bottle logs all ready to go. I divided them by color based on the designs that I wanted to create once we were ready to insert those into the construction process. It's fun to do. Another thing that is optional, but I found that it really made a difference to do this, was to prepare the cordwood as you work with it by filing off these rough little wood hairs, which come with cutting your cordwood logs. So you use a file, rasp file, and you just rub it along the edge to just kind of trim off those hairy rough edges. And you don't have to do this, but I found it really made the finishing process after working with the mortar and everything much, much easier. And plus it looks nice. I think. If you don't care about that, then I suppose you don't need to file it off, but it doesn't take that long. So laying the cordwood and beginning that process of building actually the cordwood. So the first thing that is done before any of the mortar is laid and sawdust on that is the installation of these styrofoam strips. And Doug, you can talk about that.
Yeah, one of the problems with putting mortar up against a timber is that it does retract a little bit as it dries, and so it'll leave a crack between the mortar and the timber. So we put in these 1-inch styrofoam pieces, usually 1-inch wide strips of styrofoam that would be embedded right in the mortar itself. And so when it retracted, there would still be this styrofoam there so that you wouldn't get this crack between the mortar and the post. So we did that around all the posts, around all the windows, around all the doors, every place where there would be a potential crack, potential air leak. And I think this is really helpful in preventing air leaks into the building, and air infiltration.
And they were just done vertically. They weren't done on like along the main foundation. Right.
Yeah, not on the bottom. It's not going to be an air leak on the bottom.
Yeah. So
But
once
we're done on the top, however.
yes. So sides and top, but not on the base foundation of your beginning layer of cordwood. So once, obviously there's lots of prep to all this. So then once that's done, then, and you've got all your parts and your ingredients ready to go, you lay your mortar down on 2 sides. You don't have to lay it all the way across the whole length of your log installation. So we had about 3 inches of mortar on each side, and that left us with 4 inches in the middle for insulation with that sawdust insulation mix. So we set it up that way for the first layer, and then you begin to lay your logs. And again, the sizing and the patterning that you use with your different log sizes is up to you. They can be all similar size, you can mix them. It depends on the look that you want. If you do create a pattern and want to do that, obviously you have to make sure you have enough of the size logs that you need for your design. We decided to just go random with this part of the process. Like the look of it and the variation, and yeah, so it was fun. But you can do it planned if you want. It just takes a lot longer to do. And as you can see, we've got 1 full row here going, and we'll move on into the next levels. So when you're ready to lay your second layer of cordwood, and multiple layers, obviously, you start by laying your mortar on the edges of the logs that you already have down, and then you fill in the spaces as much as you can with the sawdust, and then begin layering additional logs to fit in the spaces and sizes that you have. Typically, when you're laying the mortar, you want at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches spacing. Early on when we started, we found that we were not necessarily putting in enough mortar, because when you put a log on a big log, it squishes out. And so then some of the spacing was a little bit tight. It still worked, but you want to try to aim for 1 inch to 1.5 inches of mortar space between the logs as you're layering them. And here Doug is putting in more sawdust filling, and it gets a little tight and more challenging as you get close to the top. You want to talk about that, Doug?
Yeah, you really need to get sawdust right up to the top beam because heat rises in a building, and so you want to get sawdust up there so you don't have an airspace where you get potentially loss of heat at the top of your room. So I tried to get sawdust right up to that top beam, and that's relatively difficult to do. And so over in the lower left hand here, you can see that I'm just putting the sawdust in with my hand, reaching back and putting it in. And then I came up with this very precise tool here, this torn little paper plate that I use as a funnel when we really get up to the top to avoid getting sawdust on the mortar, which decreases the stickiness of the mortar, and use that to get the sawdust in and pack it in right up to the beam. But that takes some time. That kind of slows the process down when you get right up to the top there.
And I would say the whole process is not a speedy process. It does take time, but it's fine. I mean, and if you're working with people that you enjoy working with and being around, you have lots to talk about in the process. So it's a good thing. You'll notice here too that we started inserting some of these bottle logs in places, and you can place them randomly or also have a specific design, which we'll get to that too. And we'll see how we use that creatively. So yeah, adding special features. So your bottle logs is one special feature you can do, and you can also use different shapes of logs. So we had some leftover timbers from doing our timber frame construction, and obviously they were square and rectangles. And so I suggested that we cut those up to length, our 10 inches depth for our logs, and insert those in a design and pattern. So we did do that in certain parts of the building, and really, really happy with the results of that. So here to the left of the door, on this end, we inserted a pattern of those square rectangle logs with the round ones, and just really like how that came out as a special feature. And then with the bottles, created a design for some of those that we inserted that were different than just inserting them singly. And we found that using a form in the shape that we wanted was really helpful to do. So this round form here is the plastic cut off part of the barrel from what Doug used with mixing the lime putty in. So you find a use for everything if you're open to it and not having to purchase new things to serve your purposes. So that served as a really nice form in creating our circle design here that was, for me, was representing kind of the sun with the lighter colored bottles, and worked really, really well. And then, again, you use the mortar the same as you would with a log. So that worked really well. Yeah. And then here, it's hard to see on the picture, but this is a rectangle timber that we cut to longer. It was 8 inches longer than the cordwood, so 18 inches long, and we inserted it with 4 inches extended on the outside and 4 inches into the inside of the cabin, and it serves as a shelf. So you can put a little vase of flowers on there, little pieces of nature, whatever, on the outside and on the inside if you want. You can throw your keys on the inside, little shelf there right by the door. But it's just another way to be mindful of how you can use the resources for fun features. So, and here in the middle, we had some glass block given to us. And Doug had created this ahead of time as one unit. So this whole framed rectangle of glass block, Doug did ahead of time. And when it was ready to insert that, it was just inserted as a unit with the construction process here. And this is actually part of the wall for the bathroom, which will have a composting toilet in it. No running water. Very simple, but happy with the results. Okay, and then finishing part of the working with the mortar and the logs is pointing the mortar, for lack of a better term when looking at masonry, but it's actually tightening, recessing, and smoothing the mortar around every log. So again, it takes time, lots of love and care goes into the construction of using this method. But you can see in this picture where this side to the left of the window and underneath is then pointed. or tightened, recessed, and smooth. And then up above here, you can see the mortar is rougher and not necessarily sealed around each log, but it really sets off the logs and the design, cleans it up, and really adds to the tightness of the structure. The tools that you use to do this, you can use a variety of things, but Rob Roy talked about a knife, like a table knife, and you just bend it. So there's a little bit of a curve to it, so you can work with it that way. I found these long, skinny spoons that I bought at a thrift store, and they work really, really well for us. And that's what we typically tended to work with. Yeah, bent them a little bit, and then just work with it and shake around the log and recess it a little bit. But yeah, it looks nice.
Then in finishing up, after the mortar is dry, you always get some mortar on the logs themselves, and it shows. We decided to use a wire brush attachment to a battery electric drill. Worked extremely well to get the mortar off, to clean up the logs a bit, and just shine them up a bit. And then there are some options as far as sealing the wood. It doesn't need to be sealed. If it isn't sealed, it does darken over time. Wood generally turns gray, and then will turn very dark in color. We decided that we really like to see the wood grain both on the outside and the inside. So we put a clear water seal on the outside of it. And then we used boiled linseed oil without diluting it on the inside, that you can see over here on the right-hand side. And we really like the linseed oil. Linseed oil really brought out the annular rings here and some of the special features where we can see some of the knots and other things that really had some very nice designs in them. So the linseed oil, I really preferred to this clear water sealer. Linseed oil really was absorbed into the wood really nicely. And if we do it again, I would think that I would use linseed oil both on the outside and on the inside as my preferred way of being able to continue to see the design of the wood that I really enjoy seeing.
And Rob Roy talked about if you leave them just natural, and obviously, as Doug said, they darken over time, you can eventually go back on those logs and sand them down again to brighten them up.
It would be a lot of work.
It would be a lot of work, but we've already done a lot of work. So it's just part of maybe the maintenance of your home, should you decide to leave them natural and not seal them. So that's certainly a possibility. The other thing I wanted to say, forgot to mention, with the sealing around the logs with the spoons that we did, the mortar dries slowly typically. It depends on the humidity in the air, of course, and how sunny your days are, and how quickly it will dry. But we found that it was good to wait a little bit after setting the logs before going back and sealing around each log with the mortar and using the spoon to do that. But some of them were 2 or 3 days out. It was a little long to wait 3 days, but we got so intense and focused on doing the cordwood part that sometimes we delayed a little bit in getting back to sealing and finishing the mortar around all the logs. But it did still work. It was just harder when we waited longer. But
that's only with the lime mortar.
With the lime mortar.
With the Portland mortar or the masonry mortar, you've got to do it within hours.
Okay.
Or certainly can't leave it overnight.
Right. So there was more flexibility with the lime mortar for sure in working with that and finishing that part of the process. And this is the final building. This is looking at it from the back side on the corner. And you can see some of the special features here. This is a crescent moon shape with blue bottles and clear bottles. Here's the back side, the finished wall with the glass block in the middle there, which will let some light into the bathroom, natural light. Yeah, and we've got some additional pictures of the inside as well. And yeah, you can see the sun shining through the sun end of it, and here's the sun shining through the moon end. And this is a kind of a teardrop shaped design in the corner. That was our first one. It was supposed to be a quarter circle side shape in the corner, and we got better at that as we went along. But obviously the inside is unfinished, and we're working on that as we speak.
And you can see one advantage is that you're doing the inside walls and the outside walls at the same time. So once you get the outside walls finished, or the cordwood finished, you've got both the inside and the outside done.
Yep.
Which is an interesting advantage.
Yeah, the only thing on the inside, of course, we put in Doug put in the dividing wall between the two units. This is where the shared chimney is. This is the bathroom, what will be the bathroom, and accessible from both cabin units. And yeah, so pretty cool.
And the ceiling and the floor.
And the ceiling and the floor, yes. And we're keeping it simple for the most part. We're not going to worry about being too complex, but it is beautiful.
We have another cordwood project coming up this next summer. We've already cut logs for that purpose, and they're ready to be sawed. We've also cut the cordwood and prepped it, and we have about 7 face cords of cordwood cut, piled, and drying for next summer. We plan to do that project, which is 8 feet by 16 feet, so a much smaller cabin, which will be a toilet, shower, and sauna. And that's planned for August of this next year. And if you would be interested in participating in a hands-on workshop, keep that in mind, and we will let you know specifically when that will be.
And if you're not on our email list, you can certainly send us a note by our Facebook page, or our email will give you the contact information for that and indicate your interest, and we'll keep you in the loop as we get closer to August of 2022 and all the details with that project. But it's a lot of fun. You can learn the basics of doing it, the hands-on part, in even a few hours if that's all you have time for. But we welcome your participation in working with us and having some fun playing in the mud. And here's our contact information. So Balsam Moon Preserve, we are a nonprofit organization, and we are about peace, sustainability, renewal, and regeneration. And we view ourselves, Doug and I do, as caretakers of this place, and that we belong to the earth. And we provide a lot of workshops, and more all the time, and sharing what we know and recruiting other people we know to instruct and teach and share what they know. So it's a lot of fun in doing that. We have trails on the property through the woods, along the creek, around the pond, and it's a peaceful place, and people comment on that often. We have gardens, flower gardens, vegetable gardens. We even share with the critters. And we have a labyrinth in the woods. Yeah, we have lots of uses of solar energy that you can come and see the applications of those that Doug has done over the years. And yeah, we're happy to share this place of peace and sustainability with you. And we offer pizza nights with our wood-fired barrel oven in the summertime, and we're excited about that as well. We did it last summer and it was great fun. But you can see our contact information there. We're outside of Pine River, rural Pine River, about 6 miles out Highway 2, and then another 4 miles south or so on County Road 25. But yeah, if you want to just come and visit, you're welcome. Just let us know, send us a line, give us a call. We do have a Facebook page, but we also have a developing web page that should be up and running by February. Anything else you want to say, Doug?
I think that's it.
All right, thanks for
Thank you.
joining us and enjoy the rest of Back to Basics. Bye-bye.